Welcome to Energy Stew. This is Peter Roth, your host. And I'd like to ask you, you really know what time it is? I mean, really? Wait a minute, what is really? Time is time. What is time? How do we know time? What are we really measuring? So let's find out more about that by talking to a wonderful author, professor, and guest on the show before. And it's so great to always have him back, Christian de Quincey. Christian, welcome back to Energy Stew.
Hi, Peter. It's great to be having another conversation with you.
Good, thank you. And we're talking about the relative nature of time and what we make it, right?
Yeah, I mean, the topic of time is something that has fascinated philosophers as well as regular people from time immemorial, probably. And one of the things that I've noticed over the years, I've written quite a bit about time. It's in one of my books, Blind Spots, for example, but also written papers on it, published in various journals. One paper was called The Mystery of Time and Consciousness, where I show how the two are intimately related. But over the years, I have frequently either read or heard people say, sometimes directly to me, that time is an illusion. And so when I've queried that, I've had students, for example, say to me that they know that time is an illusion because during meditation, they experience timelessness. And when I hear that, I typically respond to the student and say something like, well, how long did your experience of timelessness last? And they usually, the penny drops typically at that moment, and they get it. And I point out then that we need to make a distinction between time as a psychological process, our awareness of time, and time as an ontological process, that reality continues to unfold from moment to moment to moment. Whatever we happen to be aware of makes no difference. And so I point out that just because we might become unaware of the passage of time in deep meditation doesn't mean that time stopped, because clearly it didn't. If somebody can come back and report on an experience of timelessness, they can only do that if they have re-entered an experience of time. And so I point out that all the while that they were experiencing timelessness, ontological time continued to unfold, and that's what allowed them to then report on that. So that's a common confusion that I've noticed, both among philosophers and the lay public, is a lack of a distinction between our awareness of time, psychological time, and the ontological of unfolding of time from one moment to the next moment to the next.
Right, so there is a progress in the universe that moves the universe forward, and we're recording that. And we learn about time through periodicity, even through movement of planets and around the sun, etc. There's constant motion forward. And, so that's, very scientific and easy to identify with. But our relationship to it varies in so many different ways based on, just our presence and our consciousness, whether we're awake or asleep or get lost in conversation. This radio show is going quickly. And what does that mean? And so how do we hold time? And how does it relate to, the movement of progress? And we can't help but age. We can't stop the timing of, our days and months. And it just keeps hurrying along with us. And you could say, well, without us, because it doesn't need us. But then again, We need it. So that's an important aspect too, is that, here we are in a third dimensional reality that operates third dimensionally, which is a lot about time and distance and etc. And so we learn the understanding of that. I'm watching my granddaughter grow up, and from an infant, now she's almost 2.5. And what has she learned about time, and how? How much did she know about time when she was a month old or 6 months old? Are we self-aware of time or not? Relate to, she's learning about Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday. and so we're programmed from birth on, we're conditioned by all these markers of time.
Yeah, now what's interesting is that that's another area of widespread confusion, is that people frequently mistake movement in space for the passage of time. Now, the time and space are clearly intimately related. Einstein established that. But Einstein also made a major error, I think, by turning time into an extra dimension of space. Basically, Einstein spatialized time. He turned it into another spatial dimension. And in doing so, he essentially eviscerated time from its intrinsic nature, which is the experience of duration. That a moment ago you mentioned, that time is related to movement of the planets and periodicity and so on. And that's true, but time is not change. Time is not movement. Even in a universe, in a reality that was completely unchanging, I don't think that could ever happen, but hypothetically, even if a reality were entirely static, where nothing was changing, that reality would still endure from one moment to the next moment to the next moment.
Right, just like the timeless meditation.
Yes, it would still endure in time. So we need to not make the mistake of equating time with change or equating time with space. And that leads to another widespread confusion that, again, among philosophers as well as lay people talk about measuring time. Well, you cannot measure time. We can only measure objects, and time is not an object. Time is something that we experience. We feel it. We feel ourselves enduring from one moment to the next moment to the next moment.
Right, because all there really is each moment in itself.
Well, there's that, but there's also the past, which influences the present.
The memory of the past, right. But
well, not just memory of the past. Memory is the past impinging on the present.
Right, because you can't have reflection on it unless you know what you're reflecting.
Yeah. So, for example, clocks don't measure time. Just, take a look at the next time you're looking particularly at an analog clock and watch the hands move. They are measuring increments of space as the hands go. They're not measuring time, they're measuring increments of space, but we have been conditioned to relate changes in space to segments of time. And it works pragmatically, but philosophically, clock time is not the same as ontological time, as the experience of duration. Now, another related to that, people will often say, well, time is just a concept, it's just a human invention. And I'm always really baffled when I hear people say that, because if time were just a human invention, then how could we ever account for the fact that humans evolved over billions of years? That would mean that for billions of years there was no time, and then suddenly, miraculously out of nowhere, humans came into being, and with that, time began. I mean, that to me seems to be just absolutely comically absurd to think that. No, we did not create time. Yes, we created the concepts of time. We created technologies to quote unquote measure time, clocks, for example, but we did not create time. We created the concepts of time, but the concepts of time are not the same as the actual time itself. Even if concepts of time never existed, time would still unfold from one moment to the next moment to the next moment.
And I think we need it in this dimension of physical reality that we live in that is doing its own thing, moving forward. It has its own displacement. And now I'm thinking, actually, because I did a show about this not long ago, on the other side, on higher dimensionality. If we're in like the spirit world, let's say we're in heaven or whatever people want to relate to about that. And I believe that there's a huge world out there of souls and spirits who aren't in third dimensional reality. And they have a big social reality out there. They have all kinds of happenings and gatherings and relationships and love, all kinds of stuff. And so the question is, what clocks do they use? What watches do they wear? What calendar do they use? And the answer is none.
Mm-hmm.
And wait a minute, but let's say we want to schedule a meeting for next week, and we want everybody to put it on their calendar at 3 o'clock next something afternoon. You know, what is that? And it doesn't exist. So then how can they schedule a meeting? Well, it's all in just the expression of the moment of and the telepathy of communicating on the other side that we just broadcast. We broadcast our own expression to others, and they agree or not agree with our broadcast and show up or don't show up as the broadcast gives them the sense of what to do, but not against a clock or a calendar. Does that make sense?
Well, yes. I mean, the very idea of entities in the transcendental domain possessing technology is such a paradigm example of human projection, that just because our day-to-day world is dominated by technology, we assume that any other advanced, whether extraterrestrials or extra-dimensional beings, would also have their own form of technology. But what is technology? Technology is, first of all, humans, like many other animals, have used tools. We invented tools. And technology can be defined as tools that are used to create new tools. And that's what technology is. Technology is different from tool use, because many other animals use tools, but they don't have a technology. And so technology is, as the philosopher Heidegger pointed out, technology is mainly a mindset. It's a mindset that has an attitude that we have the right and the might to manipulate the natural world to our own desires and our own ends. And we, of course, today are witnessing the dire consequences of that particular techno mindset. So technology is mostly an attitude of mind, or if you like, the result of a particular attitude of mind. But there are other highly intelligent species that we even know of on our own planet, such as whales and dolphins, who may well be more intelligent than the human species. But they don't have technology. They have evolved with a very different strategy. Now, I'm not claiming that these strategies were conscious or intentional, but the fact is that cetaceans, whales, and dolphins and porpoises, they evolved to streamline their bodies to suit their environment optimally. And so they have changed or adapted to suit their environment, whereas humans have taken a very different strategy, try to adapt the environment to fit us with, drastic consequences. So a highly intelligent species does not require technology. And I'm assuming that would apply equally to extraterrestrials or to entities living in a transcendental spirit domain, they wouldn't need technology, just like dolphins and whales don't need technology, and have survived for millions of years longer than the human species has or is likely to.
It's interesting how we have opinions about how the natural world behaves and think that we know better. and so we have our clocks and our calendars, and it's a heavily populated world. I mean, there has to be some order to it. And maybe there can be a higher order that we just don't know, that we're not capable of using because our brains haven't evolved to that higher clarity. But at this point, so we're operating at a lower function, perhaps than whales and dolphins, because we're dependent on the material world to, as you said, to manipulate it instead of to align with it. And so in manipulating it, we actually reduce it, and we reduce ourselves, because it keeps on limiting our expansion because we don't ask of our higher minds to carry us more. Maybe we need to do that. Maybe we do need to live more in a multidimensional mindset.
Yeah, but even if we don't adopt a multidimensional perspective on reality and just go along with the regular 3D plus time reality that science tells us we live in, we still don't need to dominate nature in order to thrive as a species.
No, we're not smart enough to do any better.
Well, you know, I think we are, because for thousands of years, indigenous peoples, before the modernist mindset evolved, and of course, as the great novelist Daniel Quinn pointed out, that really began with the invention of what he calls totalitarian agriculture. He was the novelist who wrote the novel Ishmael and followed up with the story of B. And he points out that that for millions of years, humans and our ancestors lived aligned with the natural rhythms of nature, as nomads, as hunter-gatherers, or gatherer-hunters is probably a better way to phrase it. But then one group of our species came up with a myth, highly related to the development of monotheism in religion, that humans are special, like humans are the chosen species, that the rest of the natural world is there for us to use for our own benefit and disregard the consequences.
Because we're smart enough to create technology.
Well, we have intelligence, but we have employed our intelligence to the point where it blocks out wisdom, and we need to distinguish between intelligence and wisdom.
But maybe too much technology reduces the wisdom part. It becomes
Well, it does.
knowledge,
It does.
not wisdom.
Yeah, and I wanted to point out that the reason I raised the Daniel Quinn's perspective is that he makes the distinction between what he calls levers and takers. And the modern technological mindset is one of takers. We take from nature whatever we can. But then indigenous peoples have a leave it attitude. They leave nature alone and they just participate with it, and they don't attempt to manipulate it and dominate it. Yes, they manipulate it like any other species that has opposable thumbs, but they don't do it to extreme. So it's not that the human species per se lacks wisdom. It's that a particular section, now the dominant section globally, which is this modernist techno mindset that has created our civilization, that is now dependent on fossil fuels, that will be actually the demise of civilization itself within a generation or so. That indigenous peoples for thousands of years lived in harmony with the natural world without advanced technology, without the kinds of technology that we have. They had their own basic technologies, which were a step up from tool use, but they didn't develop technology for the purpose of dominating nature to satisfy human wants, desires, and greed.
Maybe Darwin helped move along this technology because we have to fight in every way that we can, and a lot of people aren't wise enough to align back with nature and want to fight by manipulating it more so.
You mean because of the theory of survival of the fittest?
Exactly.
That notion, yeah. Yeah, but of course, as we now know, subsequent to Darwin, that nature and evolution operates at least as much and probably more through cooperation rather than competition. That we can observe competition happening in the natural world if we stick on those lenses, but we can also shift those lenses and see that nature is essentially a complex ecological system that functions because of intricate, complex interdependencies and cooperation between different aspects of the system.
But that's a collective mindset, and so many people have tribal mindsets. And tribal is survival, it's fear, and we'll do whatever we can. It doesn't matter. There are no rules. Tribes break all the rules for their own survival and kill off anything that seems to threaten it.
Right.
So people with tribal mentalities will manipulate anything in front of them, and even destroy it if need be, to supposedly help their tribe.
Including electoral systems.
Oh, yeah, that and more.
That's
Right.
a whole other story.
Right.
Yes.
But, yeah, anything that destroys the other side, including breaking all kinds of laws and mores, just because the tribe wants it.
Yeah.
And so that's a very limiting nature of humanity that we're seeing rise right now, that can't think collectively, can't see the big picture that we're talking about, of that the rest of the animal world understands and lives with. And we can't, because humans are really frail. Our minds are so vulnerable to fear and manipulation, and being manipulated by others who are also tribal and playing the same game.
Well, you raise an interesting point that could be paradoxical, certainly something I think that warrants further investigation. I agree with you on your distinction between tribalism and a collectivism, a collective mindset. And yet I was talking just a few moments ago about how indigenous peoples have developed societies much more in harmony and aligned with natural processes.
But those are ancient tribes with collective minds. And we're talking about modern tribes with not ancient minds, just something out of balance minds.
Yeah, so that's very good. We'd have to probably investigate the difference between a tribe with a collective mindset, as seems to be the case of many of the indigenous nations in Central and South America, who are trying to warn the rest of the technological world of the dire consequences if we continue. So they clearly tribal, but tribal with a collective mindset. They recognize that what's going on in technological civilization is about to doom everyone, including technological civilization itself. So being tribal itself, as I think you were pointing out, does not necessarily imply having a tribalistic mindset. That applies more to, paradoxically, to the modern technological world, where you have political tribes.
Right, corporate tribes.
Yeah. Economic tribes.
Yeah, it's all, any group that you identify with and hold fear means you have to kill off anyone who's not in that group.
Right, and in some ways that was, according to Daniel Quinn, that was exactly the mindset that began what he called the totalitarian agricultural revolution, where a group of people decided that the land was there just for human cultivation and for human use. Any other creatures that got in the way of using that land for exclusively for human benefit needed either to be walled off or fenced off, to use a metaphor that is current and dominant today, or else to kill anything that entered within their space. And so, yes, that mindset is exclusive and non-inclusive.
And yet there are some new farms being created that are very sustainable and honor every form of life, no matter how difficult it may seem for the farm. There is a balance in nature to everything has its own predator to it that keeps nature balanced. And they needed these farmers, it's a constant lesson on how to help nature support itself, and rather than this other totalitarian agricultural means of fencing anything of danger out. So we're really getting near the end of the show, and it's always so entertaining to talk with you. And I love the depth that we can get into. So we can riff on, and we can do that in another show, hopefully soon, if you would like. And I'm really happy to have done this little discussion with you. And it's wonderful. So Christian de Quincey, the author of one of your books is The Deep Spirit, Cracking the Noetic Code, and Blind Spot. I think we did an interview about that years ago. So thank you so much for all the great creative writing you're doing and work you're doing. What's your website that people can find you?
It's CDEQ, my initials, at Christian de Quincey, DEQUINCEY.com. So CDEQ at ChristianDeQuincey.com.
So the website is also ChristianDeQuincey.com.
Correct.
Great.
Oh, excuse me, I gave my email address. So yes, the website is ChristianDeQuincey.com.
Right. Thank you for both.
Yeah.
And thanks for being on Energy Stew.
And thank you for doing this work. I can continue to enjoy our conversations, and I look forward to continuing.
Thank you, me too. And this is Peter Roth, your host of Energy Stew at prn.fm. I can be reached at peter@heartriver, HEART river.org. I'd love to hear from you, and thanks so much for listening.